Hey guys, how's it going? I'm the Duke of Italy, your favorite lo-fi, favorite shirt YouTuber here. And today we are talking about another classic album this month. And I'm a little low on caffeine right now, and it's good because it kind of matches the sort of nature of this album here, despite its sort of sporadic moments of more wild energy. But I thought I might as well tone it down a little bit for something that I'm going to have not a lot of jokes this episode today, because this is probably going to be the most personal album I've talked about on this channel thus far. This is an album here about struggle, strife, depression, struggling with mental health in every single angle you could. It's about cheating, it's about using people, it's about just self-hatred, a lot of feelings of self-destruction as well. This thing is just a pit. But I described this album on Twitter the other day as the best mistake I've ever done. Referring to me listening to it, because even though I had to re-listen to it for making this video here, it is just a sublime piece of work. I am referring to the classic Shushu album, A Promise. Shushu is an experimental band fronted mainly by one Jamie Stewart. Now, Jamie Stewart, he's known for many different things, many different projects here, but he has one really distinct feature on every Shushu record here, and it's how he gets up real close to the microphone, and he peaks very often, and he sort of like whisper sings for a lot of it, and he has this sort of vibrato effect on his voice that sounds like he's just falling apart, and a lot of times he is, or maybe he's just acting and it's sort of expressing how he felt about the subject matter at the time. But either way you look at it, it is a deeply effective album here. Now, this album, calling it any genre in particular, is kind of a struggle. In a way, it's sort of like an electronic, dark version of singer-songwriter. And on the other hand, you could call it synth punk with how abrasive it can get. Or you can call it lo-fi if you want to consider lo-fi as a genre. But it's not as distinctly lo-fi as like your teen suicide. But a little bit more background on Jamie Stewart and this album in particular. This is some pretty heavy stuff. So if you don't want to get into some of the heaviest subject matter that I've gotten into this channel so far, you can turn back now. But I will be saying some things that are not easy to digest. It's not really disgusting, but it's dark. So Jamie Stewart has struggled with a lot of things in his life, and this album, A Promise, refers to him having a promise for his mother that he won't commit suicide, which right off the bat from the title, you know we're getting into something pretty heavy. And a lot of this album revolves around struggles with his family and how his brother left the family and while they were struggling. And part of it is a lot about how during the very beginning of when this album was starting to be crafted, or right before, Jamie Stewart's father committed suicide. And of course, this is a huge influence on the album as a whole. And if you don't pay attention to the lyrics even, you can tell that it's just a really caustic feeling. It's certainly not easy subject matter to digest, and this album is not the easiest to digest either, even though it's under 40 minutes. So despite this relatively brisk runtime and even quick run-through of the album, with no song going past 5 minutes and that 5-minute length only being at one point, this thing is just captivating from end to end. And before I even talk about this track list here, I want to mention, if you are into Nine Inch Nails' A Downward Spiral and you want something that isn't as manic, something that isn't as danceable, and you want something that's a lot more grounded and not as large and expansive as that album here, this album very much feels much more like a moment and something. It's like a individual conversation and something very deep and depressing and dark. But it does have a similar quality also with these synth textures. They are different synth textures. Of course, this is a lot of analog stuff. You know, you got some really interesting keyboards here, a lot of cheap stuff Jamie said he's used at points. But it does have a similar exploration of synthesizer textures that I think more bands need to do, because not a lot of bands explore those textures as much as Shushu or, in comparisons terms, Nine Inch Nails. But we're going to go ahead and get into it. This is Shushu's A Promise, and it all starts off with Sad Pony Gorilla Girl. And this is a song that Jamie Stewart actually said, at some point at least, is his favorite Shushu song. He said that during his drunk commentary of this album. And one thing about those drunk commentaries is that he does a drunk commentary on, I think, maybe every regular studio album he does. I mean, Shushu has some additional projects that are like noise or free improvisation that I don't think Jamie does this for, but he does do it for the main albums that everyone knows about. But this song starts off with like almost like a children's guitar, sort of a 2-guitar melody, and already you don't know what you're in for, because guitar is not as featured on the album as the synthesizer textures. And as far as like a ballad goes, This is the closest thing to a ballad you get on the album here. So it doesn't start off relatively exciting or blistering or anything like that. It actually starts rather digestible in comparison to the rest of this album, but the subject matter is so crushing because it's actually about a woman who's cheating on her husband with another woman, except this woman is much younger, probably early 20s at the latest. But it's certainly of an age where grooming is considered the relationship here. And the point of view is from this victim. And it's not just that. She's also being abused mentally and emotionally. And it's funny because Jamie Stewart actually jumps down an octave for the chorus here. And it almost sounds like this sort of like manic delusional thing where you're recovering from some situation and yet you're like pretending that things are okay at the same time. With Jamie's broken vocal style, it really comes through. It's also the really bizarre imagery that builds up a really interesting picture here. And of course, this song changes pretty drastically as the synth textures, and it's almost like tape loops are being involved here as everything is just warping and being turned upside down. And you get this hitting sound, which is actually apparently Jamie Stewart slapping himself in the studio, which kind of mimics a lot of the abuse going on in this relationship here. And it's sort of interesting because Jamie Stewart wrote this because he saw this exact relationship happening from his apartment, even the one he recorded this music in. So it's almost like with the guitar and all that, it's almost like putting it into this tiny little event that nobody really knows about. And it seems like just this tiny little thing that if you can know a little bit about, but it doesn't really affect you that deeply, but there's really something much deeper going on. Already something pretty heavy. And the next track is Apostat Commander, which is a very, very clear choice, I guess, for a single if this album were to have one, because it really captures the themes really well. It captures the inspiration for this album because the subject matter is Jamie Stewart's father, and it has probably the most easy to understand sound going on here. The drums are these minimalist electronic drums that just click away. The subject matter is intensely crushing. It's literally just being talked out of suicide. And you get these really crushed up industrial fragments, almost like some tom fills, up until you get this really swamped out synth-filled haze of a chorus. It's a very extreme sound that carries a whole lot of emotion, especially as Jamie is belting out this chorus. And the lyrics are profound, incredibly profound, very easy to understand. All that you left for someone. It's just a harrowing track in general. And the next track is Walnut House. And this is a track that brings up Jamie's sexuality a bunch. Jamie is bisexual in real life, and a lot of this album will discuss further his sexuality and failed relationships, or even if you could call them that. But this song is really interesting because it compares two different situations. It compares an elderly person basically fading from dementia and Jamie having a lot of encounters with strangers that it could be potentially harmful to his health. And it's filled with these looming electronic drones. Very eclectic sound so far on this album coming from this track here in particular. And it's got this really old, upright, echoed piano that sounds haunting. And it's just almost like this ballad until we get the electronic, just crushing event where you just get "Don't Worry, Mom" over and over and over again. And it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek with how sarcastic it is. But if you can't tell, this is an amazing song, and it's one that grips you immensely. And one thing that you can already tell about this album is that every track is different, and every track has something very distinct to say. And next we get the track, which I'm going to have to read this here because it's quite a long title. 20,000 Deaths for Idolin Gonzalez, 20,000 Deaths for Jamie Peterson. It's honestly quite a cruel track that pairs this almost poppy sound with Jamie Stewart's very harsh sounding vocals. And it's not that long of a track, but it's one that is constantly looking for resolution and solace, but it never finds it. But a lot of it actually sort of gives off this sort of IDM, sort of electronic body music feel with this very similar to Aphex Twin sounding synthesizers going off. And it feels like it's almost like trying to make you dance, but in the context of the album, it just makes you sit there in bewilderment. The next track is Pink City. This is quite a different track as it is crushingly noisy, and it's sort of about this author who wrote about the Balkan War. And this track is actually really fast and it's really hard hitting, and it's probably one of the most interesting sounding tracks on the album so far. But at the same time, it's one of the most abrasive. In a way, it almost sounds like a Microphones track, something like My Warm Blood almost, but it's whispered and it's just so incredibly heavy. It actually sounds rather warlike, kind of alluding to the Girl with Basket of Fruit sound that we wouldn't get for another, like 15 years. And then we get the track Sad Reduxographer. This is a track that dives into the sexuality exploration aspects I was mentioning earlier a bit more, except it's about him being into this guy who doesn't just not like him, but only uses him. And it has a lot of commentary about this sort of a concept of value and gift giving, as it talks about him taking a picture of himself and Jamie Stewart actually having a lot of issues with his own body and considering this as a gift, but it's sort of destroyed, and it destroys his mental image as it doesn't cost anything, except it actually costs rather a lot. It costs a whole lot of effort. And this is probably the easiest track here, one of the least cacophonous ones, probably relatively easy to digest in the grand scheme of things, but because of this, it actually comes off as much more lonely, which is exactly what it means because the feelings of the lyrics are matching perfectly. And the synth melody is actually almost sounding like a broken music box, the way it sort of twinkles away. And, in terms of symbolism, you can connect that yourself, but it's pretty crushing when you come upon a conclusion. And up next is the track Blacks. And despite the minimalist sections, it's almost a rock and roll track. And the lyrics are all things that Jamie's father said before committing suicide. And not a lot of them string together. In fact, they barely string together at all. But every line hits differently with how abstract and weird they are. But other lines are actually much more direct and understandable. But it's really the warping and swelling dynamics of this track that really makes it almost like a climax of the album, where you have really quiet sort of ambient IDM moments, and it's contrasted with this huge synths that just crash in. And I know I mentioned the rock and roll parts, but it's really like that only hits with these huge swelling synths, and they're so abrasive and heavy, and it matches exactly what the track was going for. That is one thing about this album that I like a whole lot, is that it knows exactly how to depict what it's saying. And so your understanding of this album goes so deep. And just for example, me, I am a heterosexual man who never really dealt with these family issues, and yet I can kind of connect them to other problems I've had in my life. Obviously not ones as heavy as Jamie Stewart has dealt with, but these feel really relatable because he really knows how to get in your head. And up next is the song Brooklyn Dodgers. This is the song about his brother leaving the family behind to go live in New York as someone much happier. And it's maybe the most dissonant track here. While there's not as much cacophony going on, just the bare instrumentals themselves are clashing against each other. And the contrast is super interesting because you have this feeling of being happy for his brother, but just anguished the fact that he's not being helped. But at the same time, you got the synths that really shouldn't be that dissonant, and yet they're just hurting each other. And lyrically, it's a really nice point of subtlety for the album, and it's rather beautiful. And next is the track Fast Car, which is a Tracy Chapman cover. Shoo Shoo is known for a lot of covers. In fact, I own the Shoo Shoo Sings Nina record, which is just where Jamie Stewart sings Nina Simone songs with his rather hushed and whispered vocals, but they're rather haunting at the same time, which I do recommend you guys check out. It is a cool record, but it is very minimal. It's either a ukulele or a child's guitar and pretty minimalist droning synths. And it is very slow and crushing, but it's actually the song with a tiny, tiny bit of hope in there somewhere. And it also shows another element of songwriting that I really appreciate from Jamie Stewart, and it's putting himself in a female's perspective, which I think when you have that in a dark and depressing album and you switch the gendered perspective and it's coming from a guy, it shows like a real point of vulnerability. And Jamie Stewart is a real genius for that, especially with Girl with a Basket of Fruit, because that type of stuff has really lent itself to some really interesting moments for songwriting for the rest of time. And it's something that I think has only happened this century. But this song is slow and crushing. The textures warp very subtly, but the lyrics about trying to move away and find some hope in here somewhere, overlaid by the very sparse and almost empty beat, are absolutely just honestly a little hard to sit through. And it's about 5 minutes long, being by far the longest track here. It's got this really winding pace to it. And it's nice having a point of quiet after Brooklyn Dodgers. The album is finished off with the phenomenal Ian Curtis Wishlist, one of the most abstract moments on the record, one of the most drumless parts, and one of the most interesting as well. And it is started with a gorgeous wall of synthesizers. And it's a song about wanting someone else, in this case for Jamie, a woman, or I guess you could even point this towards a man. But it's not even about being rejected for any reason other than you're not complete enough or not mentally there enough to be able to maintain a relationship. But it's a track where Jamie is like desperately calling out that someone could appreciate him for what he is. And the synths warp until they are absolutely wailing against the track. And it really holds the ending down. It's crushingly sad. Apparently Jamie Stewart was drunk when he recorded the vocals for this, but they're absolutely insane. They're like half sung, half yelled spoken word. It's almost like you can hear glass breaking at one point. Even the concept of Ian Curtis wish list is kind of crushing. Because I don't know if you guys know, but Ian Curtis had epilepsy, and he actually had a fear of holding his own child, and his relationships were dysfunctional as well. Ian Curtis has a really interesting life, and even other than him being the lead singer of Joy Division, I think it's really interesting to go look and see basically what he did in his life. But it's really interesting seeing these comparisons and sort of watching Jamie unintentionally repeating some of these mistakes and seeing some of these issues with his life that Ian Curtis faced. But that is the album, and it ends on a super high note. This whole thing is crushing from front to back. Is it the best Shoo Shoo record? I don't know. It's up there with Girl with a Basket of Fruit, but Shoo Shoo has a pretty amazing discography. And it's certainly something I'll need to scrape out the rest of because I've only heard like 5 of their albums. In terms of flaws, very minimal. I just think maybe 1 or 2 of the tracks don't grip me as hard as the rest do. But it's the rest of the tracks here, and it's really that this album as a whole fits in this very special dark place. And it's something I recommend everyone to listen to. It's truly a work of art. And seeing that there are people that go to my art school actually who try to make something that is a bit on the LGBT side, something very personal, something showing off their family a whole bunch, and they don't hit it on the head, I really recommend you guys to take a note from Jamie Stewart, because no one does it better than Shoo Shoo. I'm giving this thing an almost as good as Die Lit because it is fantastic. And that's about it. Hope you guys have the time to check this album out. I highly recommend it. I'd appreciate like and subscribe, comments, questions, and concerns down below. And in the description, you'll have my social media and my Discord if you want to join that and talk to me about music. I'm totally open to do that. I've got time for you guys. And that's about it. Hope you guys are doing well out there. Have a good day. Bye.